up with 7.2%. Now, what the other results shows us mainly is that the main two traditional parties, the Conservatives and indeed the Socialists, have absolutely collapsed, with the Socialists ending with 1.7% of the vote, and the traditional Republican Party, the Gaullist Party, with 4.8% of the vote. Now, that means that because both are under 5%, they will lose the deposit as far as the campaign is concerned. Now, you don't have to be too sophisticated a pollster to translate all the results, and Mr. Macron's first-round result into what looks like to be a rather convincing victory for him in the second round. But having said that, he still has many enemies, and in his speech last night, he said that nothing was certain. And he certainly called for a wall against the far right. He used that expression, referring to the so-called Republican Pact, where all major political parties and voters unite to ward off extremists and keep them out of power.
We're going to see the campaign shift, aren't we? Because Macron's actually been quite quiet. He hasn't sort of gone full throttle because he's been, effectively busy and worried about international affairs rather than what's happening at home.
Yes, indeed, and that very much is a criticism that has been levelled at him. He seemed to be far too busy on the phone to Vladimir Putin, trying to sort out the war in Ukraine, rather than focusing on the day-to-day grievances of ordinary French voters. And some have criticised, actually, his policy in relation to the Ukraine, saying that he, was effectively trying to end the war in Russia's favour. A lot of candidates have been associated with Putin in an unpalatable way. Having said that, meanwhile, Marine Le Pen was on the ground. She was going around and she was addressing pressing issues, talking about the cost of living, the price of fuel, and generally, how to improve the lot of ordinary people.
Is there a sense that people... I know there's always been a sort of fairly strong support for the National Front and the Since National Rally in France. It's always been in the forefront of politics. But is there a sense that people in France are really supporting what she stands for, or are they just disenfranchised and looking for an alternative?
Well, as very often in elections, they very much turn into presidential rejection. So there's a massive vote that is anti-Macron, expressing disappointment in his 5 years so far. We've seen that his presidency has been marked, and indeed marred, by massive protests like the Yellow Vests, for example, who pretty much on the street every Saturday. But, there's a lot of disillusionment in general, and I think that will translate in a higher abstention rate in the second round, which will work in his favour, it has to be said. Having said all that, I think the far-right party of Marine Le Pen is scoring its usual rate, to be fair. And remember that her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, was already in the second round of the election. That's back in 2002 against Jacques Chirac. I think, people don't know much about France and about Marine Le Pen in general is she's not a massive political force, in the sense that she has struggled during her political career to even get elected as an MP. She got there barely, just about in 2017, after her fifth attempt, and after being rejected a number of times by her northern voters in the north of France. Her party, the National Rally, has only 6 MPs in the National Assembly out of 577 MPs. So this is very much a legacy of mediocrity, and it will be hard to see how could that translate into her eventually getting into the Élysée Palace, frankly.
Okay. Well, look, it's still an interesting few days ahead on this one. Nabila Ramdani, as always, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I lived in France for a couple of years, so I very intimately know the French protest culture and had a lot of weekends scuppered by the Gilets jaunes. So we'll see how that all plays out.
It's interesting. It's quite nice when there's politics going on that don't affect us directly.
That's true, yes.
Be more of an observer with it all.